The wind howled through the cracked windows of Jacob's worn-down cabin, rattling loose shutters like old bones. Rain fell in sheets, drenching the muddy road that wound through the outskirts of the town, a place long forgotten by progress. Jacob sat in his rickety armchair, nursing a chipped mug of weak coffee, his tired eyes staring at the creaky door. Life had been hard for as long as he could remember, but at least the quiet suited him. Then it happened. A strange, distant hum cut through the storm, a noise unlike anything Jacob had ever heard. It wasn't a plane or a helicopter. It was deeper, resonant, as if the air itself was vibrating. He stood, curious, and squinted out the window. In the storm's flickering lightning, something massive and metallic roared across the night sky, trailing smoke and fire. With a deafening crash, it hit the nearby woods, shaking the ground beneath Jacob's feet. He grabbed his old raincoat and flashlight, muttering to himself as he braced against the storm. Probably some military test gone wrong, he figured, though part of him knew better. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't from around here. Jacob made his way through the mud and brush, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He stumbled through the wet forest until he found the crash site, a clearing torn apart by the impact. Trees lay in splinters, and the air smelled of scorched metal and ozone. At the center of the wreckage lay a large, glowing pod, half buried in the mud, hissing with steam. Strange symbols pulsed along its surface. Then something moved. Jacob froze, squinting into the darkness. From the mangled pod emerged a creature unlike anything he'd seen. Towering and powerful, its form was a strange mix of predator and prey. Thick limbs, claws sharp as knives, and glowing eyes that shimmered with both intelligence and fear. It let out a low, guttural growl, backing away cautiously. Jacob kept the flashlight steady, his heart pounding in his chest. "Easy there," he whispered, slowly lowering the light so it wouldn't startle the creature. "I ain't here to hurt you." The beast blinked, its massive frame trembling. It was hurt. Jacob could see that much. One of its limbs dragged limply, and a deep gash ran along its side, oozing a strange blue fluid. Despite its size and ferocity, the creature looked lost, confused. Jacob knew that look well. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every day. He took a slow step forward, holding out his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're a long way from home, ain't ya?" he said, voice soft despite the storm howling around them. The beast flinched, but didn't retreat. Its glowing eyes locked onto Jacob's, studying him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Without thinking twice, Jacob shrugged off his raincoat and draped it gently over the creature's wounded side. "Let's get you out of this mess before the whole town shows up." The beast's glowing eyes flickered, and to Jacob's surprise, it didn't resist as he coaxed it toward his cabin, limping and cautious but willing to follow. Back at the cabin, Jacob cleared out the old shed behind his house, making a makeshift bed from blankets and spare clothes. The alien beast collapsed onto the pile with a heavy thud, exhaling a low, exhausted rumble. It watched him cautiously, but there was no aggression, only fear and weariness. Jacob grabbed his first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. "You're in luck," he muttered as he carefully cleaned the creature's wound. "I've patched up worse on myself." The beast twitched under his touch, but it didn't lash out. It seemed to understand that Jacob was helping, and slowly, the tension in its massive body eased. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the shed, there was a strange sense of calm. Jacob sat back, wiping his hands on a towel. "There. Good as new," he said, though both of them knew the beast needed far more than a first aid kit to fully recover. The creature made a low, rumbling noise that could almost be mistaken for gratitude. Jacob gave it a small, tired smile. "You'll pull through, big fella." He stood to leave, pausing at the door to glance back at the alien beast curled up in the blankets. It looked at him with glowing eyes, not as a predator or prey, but as something in between, a creature far from home, scared and alone. Jacob knew that feeling better than anyone. "Rest easy," he said quietly, pulling the door shut behind him. "You're safe here." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the town coated in fresh mud and rumors. By the time Jacob wandered into town for supplies, word had already spread. He had taken in the strange creature from the crash site. "Have you lost your damn mind, Jacob?" The store clerk scoffed, as he rang up a bag of canned beans. That thing could be dangerous. Probably some government experiment gone wrong. You better hand it over before you get yourself killed. Jacob shrugged. It's just a creature. Same as any. Needs help, that's all. The clerk shook his head in disbelief. Help? That thing's gonna tear your head off the second you turn your back. Jacob ignored the warnings, knowing full well that most folks around here wouldn't lift a finger to help anyone, let alone something they didn't understand. He loaded his supplies into the truck, feeling the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on him. By the time he got back to the cabin, the beast was awake and alert, watching him from the corner of the shed with those glowing eyes. It had made no attempt to escape. If anything, it looked calmer, as if Jacob's presence offered some kind of comfort. Still here, huh? Jacob chuckled as he set down the supplies. Guess that means you trust me. The beast let out a low, rumbling noise, something between a growl and a purr. Jacob grinned, the sound oddly reassuring. Well, he said, tossing a can of beans onto the workbench. Looks like we're stuck with each other for a while. That night, Jacob sat on the porch, nursing another cup of coffee as the beast rested in the shed. He could hear it shifting occasionally, the sound of claws scraping against wood. For the first time in a long while, Jacob didn't feel quite so alone. As he gazed up at the stars, a strange sense of peace washed over him. He didn't know where the creature had come from or what trouble it might bring, but for now, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they had found each other, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The news spread like wildfire through the small town. It wasn't every day that an alien creature crashed into the woods, and it certainly wasn't every day that someone as down and out as Jacob took it in. Rumors swirled around coffee shops, grocery stores, and gas stations. Jacob's lost his mind, the townsfolk said with sneering smiles. Can't even fix his own roof, and now he thinks he can take care of an alien monster. Jacob heard the whispers, of course. He always did, but they didn't bother him. Not really. People in town had been looking down on him for years. What was one more reason for them to laugh? He spent the next few days tending to the beast. Ro, as he decided to call it. There was something soothing about the name. Short and simple. Ro wasn't just some wild animal. There was an intelligence in those glowing eyes, a depth that told Jacob this creature was more than the sum of its sharp teeth and claws. Don't listen to them, Jacob muttered one evening, as he tossed an old blanket over Ro's back. The beast let out a low rumble, almost as if it understood. They don't know what it's like to be alone. You and me, we gotta stick together. The townspeople's curiosity soon turned to fear. They gathered outside Jacob's cabin in groups, peering through the fence and whispering among themselves. Parents warned their children not to go near the place, afraid that the alien beast might escape. Even old friends, what few Jacob had, kept their distance, shaking their heads in disapproval. You've really gone and done it this time, Jacob, said Ted, an old drinking buddy who stopped by one morning to deliver groceries. That thing in your shed, what do you think's gonna happen when it turns on you? Jacob shrugged as he took the bag. It won't, Ted snorted, lighting a cigarette. You always were a stubborn fool. He took a long drag, watching Jacob with a mix of pity and disbelief. Look, man, it's not too late. You could turn it over to the authorities. Let them deal with it. You'd be doing everyone a favor. Jacob leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. It's not their problem. It's mine. Ted shook his head, flicking ash into the dirt. You always did pick the hardest way, didn't you? Jacob gave a small smile. Yeah, guess I've got a habit of that. That afternoon, 2 sheriff's deputies showed up at Jacob's cabin, their patrol car kicking up a cloud of dust as it rolled down the dirt road. One of the officers, a heavy-set man with a gruff voice, stepped onto the porch adjusting his belt. Jacob, we've been getting complaints about that thing you got in your shed. Jacob stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, as the officer continued. Now, I'm not saying you're in any kind of trouble yet, but folks are scared. You know how people get when they don't understand something. Would make everyone sleep a little easier if you let us take a look at it, just to be sure it ain't dangerous. Jacob shook his head. It's not dangerous. It's hurt. The other deputy, younger and less patient, sneered. Ain't safe to keep something like that around. You don't know what it's capable of. Jacob stared at the officers, calm and resolute. I know exactly what it's capable of. and it's staying right here." The deputies exchanged glances, clearly frustrated. "Suit yourself," the older one muttered, "but if that thing causes trouble, it'll be on you." Jacob gave a slow nod. "I'll take my chances." As the patrol car drove off, kicking up another cloud of dust, Jacob leaned against the porch railing, sighing deeply. He could feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on him like a heavy blanket, but he refused to let it crush him. Ro needed him, and he wasn't about to abandon the creature just because people were too scared to understand. Ro's recovery was slow but steady. Each day the creature seemed more comfortable, its once nervous movements becoming relaxed and fluid. It followed Jacob around the property like a massive, lumbering shadow, curious about everything: old tools, the rusted pickup truck, even the chickens that clucked nervously in their coop. One afternoon, as Jacob repaired the rickety fence around his property, Ro tried to help by nudging the wooden posts into place with its snout. The effort, though clumsy, brought a rare smile to Jacob's face. "Not bad," he muttered, patting the creature's broad head. "You're getting the hang of it." Ro let out a low, rumbling sound that Jacob could only describe as a purr. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was close enough. Despite the small joys, the pressure from the town grew stronger. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. Some said the beast was dangerous, just waiting for the right moment to attack. Others whispered that Jacob had lost his mind, that living alone for so long had made him forget the difference between right and wrong. One evening, as Jacob sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, a group of townsfolk gathered at the edge of his property. Torches flickered in the twilight, and angry voices echoed through the quiet. "You can't keep it here, Jacob," someone shouted from the crowd. "It's not natural. That thing belongs in a lab, not in your shed," another voice jeered. Jacob stood slowly, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't move from the porch, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Ro, sensing the tension, let out a low growl from the shed, its glowing eyes visible through the slats in the wooden walls. The crowd backed away slightly, uneasy at the sight of the alien's glowing gaze. "You're gonna regret this, Jacob," one of the men muttered, turning to leave. "When that thing turns on you, don't say we didn't warn you." The others followed, grumbling as they disappeared into the night. Jacob watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of anger and sadness settle in his chest. People always feared what they didn't understand. It had been that way for as long as he could remember, but fear wouldn't change his mind. He glanced back at the shed, where Ro lay curled up in the corner, its massive form barely visible in the dim light. The beast's glowing eyes watched him quietly, as if sensing the human's frustration. Jacob gave a tired smile. "Don't you worry, big guy," he whispered. "We've got each other. That's all that matters." Later that night, as Jacob lay in bed, listening to the distant sounds of the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The townspeople weren't going to let this go, and if the authorities got involved, well, he didn't want to think about what might happen to Ro. But for now, all he could do was wait, and hope that patience and kindness would be enough to protect the creature he had come to care for. In the quiet of the night, Ro let out a low, contented rumble from the shed. Jacob smiled to himself, knowing that, for better or worse, they were in this together, and no amount of fear or mockery could change that. Days melted into weeks, and the once scared alien beast named Ro began to settle into its new life with Jacob. What started as tentative trust grew into an unspoken bond between the two, one built not on words, but on quiet gestures and shared moments. The beast followed Jacob around the property like a loyal dog, its heavy footsteps thudding in rhythm with Jacob's shuffle. Jacob had never thought of himself as someone who needed company. For most of his life, he'd been content with his own thoughts, his coffee, and the occasional visit to town. But now, with Ro by his side, things felt different. There was a strange comfort in having the creature around. Even if it didn't speak or smile, it was the kind of silent companionship Jacob hadn't realized he was missing. One morning, Jacob woke to the sound of something large thudding against the side of the cabin. He shuffled to the window, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, only to find Ro nudging a broken piece of the fence into place with its massive head. Jacob chuckled, pulling on his boots. "Well, look at you," he muttered. stepping outside. "Trying to help, huh?" The beast gave a soft rumble, pleased with itself, even though the fence post was now completely out of alignment. Jacob squatted beside it, patting Roe's head. "I appreciate the effort, big guy, but you've got the subtlety of a freight train." Roe tilted its head, making a strange, low-pitched sound that Jacob could have sworn was the closest thing the creature could get to a laugh. With a sigh, Jacob went to work, guiding the beast to hold the post steady while he hammered it back into place. The two worked side by side until the fence stood upright again, a little crooked, but standing nonetheless. "Not bad for a couple of misfits," Jacob said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Roe made a satisfied grunt, settling down in the dirt next to him. They sat there for a moment, side by side, enjoying the quiet of the morning. For the first time in years, Jacob felt something close to contentment. As the days passed, Roe learned to mimic Jacob's habits. It trailed behind him while he fed the chickens, watched him tinker with the old truck, and even curled up by the fireplace on cold nights, its massive body taking up most of the floor. There was a simplicity to their routine that felt natural, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few weeks. Jacob wasn't the only one changing. Roe, too, began to show signs of growth, not just physically, but emotionally. It no longer flinched at sudden noises or new sights. The once wary creature now rested its head on Jacob's lap without hesitation, trusting him completely. But the town's suspicion didn't waver. Every trip into town brought the same disapproving looks and whispered warnings. Parents pulled their children closer when Jacob passed by, and old acquaintances crossed the street to avoid him. Some laughed behind his back, calling him crazy. Others whispered about how dangerous the alien was, spreading rumors that the creature was merely waiting for the right moment to attack. "You'll see," they said to one another. "It's just a matter of time before that thing shows its true nature." But Jacob didn't care. Roe wasn't a monster, and no amount of gossip would change that. One evening, as Jacob sat on the porch with his usual cup of coffee, Roe wandered over, resting its large head on Jacob's shoulder. Jacob chuckled, patting the beast's head. "You're not half bad, you know that?" Roe's glowing eyes blinked slowly, the alien equivalent of a contented sigh. The two sat in companionable silence, watching the stars blink to life overhead. It was a small, simple moment, but one that made Jacob's heart feel lighter than it had in years. But the peace didn't last. One stormy night, Roe stirred suddenly, its ears twitching and glowing eyes narrowing as it sniffed the air. Jacob noticed the shift immediately. "What is it, big guy?" he asked, setting down his mug. Roe let out a low growl. Standing at full height, its muscles tense beneath its thick hide, it moved toward the edge of the porch, scanning the horizon with focused intensity. That's when Jacob saw it, a faint, glowing light in the distance, cutting through the storm clouds like a knife. It wasn't lightning. It was something else, something far more dangerous. "Ah, hell," Jacob muttered, pulling on his coat. He knew instinctively that this was no coincidence. Whatever, or whoever, was out there, it was looking for Roe. The light grew closer, revealing a sleek alien ship descending just beyond the tree line. Its engines hummed ominously, the sound vibrating through the air like a warning. Roe growled low, moving closer to Jacob as if to shield him from the approaching threat. Jacob could feel the tension in the creature's body, the way it bristled with both fear and determination. "They've come for you, haven't they?" Jacob whispered, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. Roe let out a soft whine, a sound filled with both regret and fear. Jacob reached out, resting a hand on the beast's broad head. "Don't you worry, big guy. We've come too far to give up now." The ship landed with a heavy thud, and figures began to emerge from the shadows, alien hunters, armed and armored, their glowing eyes scanning the forest like predators searching for prey. Jacob tightened his grip on Roe's shoulder. "Listen to me," he whispered. "We stick together, you hear? No matter what happens." Roe rumbled in agreement, pressing closer to the human who had shown it nothing but kindness since the day they met. The two stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The alien hunters moved closer, their voices low and guttural. One of them pointed toward the cabin, issuing a sharp command. Jacob didn't flinch. "Looks like we've got company," he muttered, glancing at Roe. "You ready for this?" Roe gave a low growl, its glowing eyes narrowing with determination. "That's what I thought," Jacob said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Together, Man and beast stood their ground, waiting for the storm to break. The rain poured relentlessly as the sleek alien ship settled at the edge of the forest. Steam hissed from its landing thrusters, and the hum of alien technology vibrated through the night air. From the ship emerged a squad of alien hunters, tall, armored figures, with weapons that gleamed in the storm's dim light. Their movements were precise, methodical, like predators stalking prey. Ro crouched beside Jacob on the porch, its glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. A low growl rumbled from deep within its chest, and Jacob placed a hand on the creature's neck, steadying it. "Easy, big guy. We're not going to make it easy for them, but we've got to be smart about this." The alien hunters scanned the area with glowing visors, their weapons raised. One of them pointed toward the shed where Ro had been staying, barking a command in a language Jacob couldn't understand. They had found Ro's scent. Meanwhile, back in town, word spread that the alien hunters had arrived. People whispered and speculated, excitement mixed with fear. A group of townsfolk gathered at the sheriff's office, demanding that Jacob turn over the alien beast before things got out of hand. "This is our chance to get rid of it," one of them shouted. "He should have handed it over when he had the chance." The sheriff frowned, but gave no answer. A storm was brewing, not just in the sky, but among the townspeople. Panic was spreading like wildfire. At the cabin, Jacob knew time was running out. He needed to act fast if he wanted to keep Ro safe. "We gotta move, big guy," he whispered to the beast, gripping the makeshift reins he had fashioned around its shoulders. "We stick to the forest. Stay quiet. Stay low." Ro let out a soft growl of agreement, lowering its massive body to make it easier for Jacob to climb onto its back. The two of them slipped into the woods just as the alien hunters reached the cabin, their weapons scanning the area with laser precision. Jacob's heart raced as they moved deeper into the forest, the rain and mud making every step more treacherous. Ro's heavy paws squelched in the muck, but the creature moved with surprising stealth for something so large. Jacob held on tight, whispering directions as they wove through the underbrush. Back in town, a betrayal was already underway. A few of the more fearful townsfolk had taken matters into their own hands, sneaking off into the storm to alert the alien hunters about Ro's location. They feared the beast, and they feared what might happen if the hunters failed to capture it. "It's better this way," one of them muttered, as they guided the hunters toward the forest. "That thing doesn't belong here. It was only a matter of time before it turned on us." The hunters, following the new lead, adjusted course and began tracking Jacob and Ro through the woods. They were closing in fast. Jacob felt Ro stiffen beneath him as the alien beast sensed the hunters drawing near. They could hear the hum of alien drones overhead, scanning the forest with piercing beams of light. The rain did little to mask the sound of the hunters' heavy boots crashing through the undergrowth. "Don't stop now, buddy," Jacob whispered, patting Ro's neck. "We're almost out of their range. Just a little further." Ro huffed in response, pushing through the thick brush, muscles rippling beneath its slick hide. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, like two halves of the same whole, relying on each other to survive. Jacob wasn't just running with a beast, he was running with family. They reached a narrow ravine, the rushing waters below swollen from the storm. Jacob squinted through the rain, searching for a way across. "All right, big guy, you think you can make the jump?" Ro grunted, taking a few steps back to gain momentum. With a powerful lunge, the alien beast soared across the ravine, landing heavily on the other side. Jacob clung to its back, heart pounding as they continued through the forest. But just as Jacob thought they might escape, a drone overhead locked onto them, its red sensor flashing ominously. The hunters were right behind them now, their weapons trained and ready to fire. Ro turned abruptly, positioning itself between Jacob and the incoming threat. The beast's glowing eyes burned with determination, and a deep growl rumbled from its chest. It was ready to fight. "No, Ro," Jacob whispered urgently. "We have to keep moving." But it was too late. The first shot was fired, a pulse of blue energy that tore through the air, narrowly missing Ro's shoulder. The beast snarled, baring its sharp teeth in warning. It wouldn't run anymore. It was ready to protect Jacob, no matter the cost. At that moment, the hunters emerged from the shadows, surrounding them on all sides. Jacob knew They were trapped. The drones hovered above, their lights flickering through the storm. The alien hunters raised their weapons, and Jacob clenched his fists, ready to fight alongside Ro if he had to. But just as the hunters closed in, something incredible happened. Ro let out a deafening roar, a sound so powerful it shook the ground beneath them. The air around the beast shimmered, and a strange energy pulsed from its body, radiating outward in waves. The hunters faltered, their weapons stuttering, as the energy short-circuited their systems. The tide had turned. The hunters backed away, stunned by the sudden display of power. They hadn't expected the beast to be this strong, this dangerous. One by one, they retreated into the shadows, unwilling to risk a confrontation with the creature they had underestimated. Jacob stared in disbelief as the hunters disappeared into the storm, their ship rising back into the sky with a hiss of steam. They were gone. As the forest fell silent, Jacob let out a shaky breath, resting his forehead against Ro's broad neck. "You did it, buddy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Ro let out a soft rumble, nuzzling Jacob gently with its snout. The bond between them, once forged through kindness and trust, was now unbreakable. They stood there for a moment, drenched in rain, but victorious. Jacob knew that their fight wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that family isn't always made by blood or species, but by the bonds we choose to build. "Come on, big guy," Jacob whispered, giving Ro a pat on the side. "Let's go home." Together, man and beast walked back through the forest, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Jacob and Ro emerged from the forest just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The storm had passed, leaving the ground wet and slick with mud. The town lay quiet in the distance, unaware of the battle that had unfolded in the woods. Ro's massive body moved slowly beside Jacob, exhausted but steady. The alien beast had fought not just with strength but with heart, and Jacob knew that without Ro's bravery, neither of them would have made it out alive. They approached the cabin, and Jacob sighed in relief, patting Ro's side. "We made it, buddy. We're still standing." The beast let out a soft rumble, nuzzling Jacob's shoulder as if to say, "We did it together." But the peace didn't last long. Word of the hunters' defeat spread quickly through the town, and it wasn't long before people gathered near Jacob's cabin, drawn by a mixture of fear, shame, and curiosity. The same neighbors who had mocked Jacob now stood silently, watching from a distance as Ro settled on the porch beside him. The alien beast, once feared as a monster, sat calmly at Jacob's side, its glowing eyes half closed in contentment. It looked nothing like the terrifying creature they had imagined. "That thing, it saved him," someone whispered from the crowd. "Yeah," another murmured. "Saved him, and probably saved us too." Jacob stood slowly, facing the gathered crowd with a steady gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet defiance. "I told y'all," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's not just a beast. It's family." The sheriff stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You really trust that thing, don't you, Jacob?" Jacob gave a small, tired smile. "With my life." The sheriff rubbed the back of his neck, glancing toward Ro, who sat quietly, watching the humans with patient eyes. For the first time, there was no fear, only curiosity. "Guess I owe you an apology," the sheriff muttered, tipping his hat. "We all do." One by one, the townspeople murmured their agreements. The ridicule they'd once thrown at Jacob now hung heavy in the air, replaced by guilt and quiet respect. A few of them offered to help rebuild the broken fence or fix the leaks in his roof. Small gestures, but they carried meaning. Jacob waved them off with a smile. "It's all right. We got through it, didn't we?" In the days that followed, things began to change. The town, once fearful and distrustful, slowly came to accept the presence of the alien beast. Children peeked over the fence, marveling at Ro's size, while farmers stopped by with food, curious about the strange creature that now lived among them. Jacob watched it all with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Ro had not just earned his place in Jacob's life, but in the town as well. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob and Ro sat together on the porch, watching the stars blink into existence. The air was cool and still, and the weight of the past weeks felt like a distant memory. "You did good, big guy," Jacob whispered, resting his hand on Roe's head. The beast rumbled softly in response, pressing closer to the human who had saved it, not just with food or shelter, but with kindness. Jacob leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee as he gazed up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, in the vastness of space, Roe's home was waiting. But for now, here on Earth, the alien beast had found something just as precious. A family. "You belong here," Jacob said quietly, "for as long as you want to stay." Roe huffed softly, settling its massive head on Jacob's lap. It didn't matter where they came from. What mattered was the bond they had built. One moment at a time, the days turned into weeks, and life returned to a peaceful rhythm. Roe helped Jacob with the chores, albeit clumsily, knocking over fence posts and scaring the chickens on occasion. But Jacob didn't mind. Every mistake, every stumble, was just another step in the strange, beautiful journey they shared. The townspeople, once fearful and suspicious, slowly warmed to Roe's presence. Children dared each other to pet the massive beast, and neighbors occasionally stopped by with food or tools, curious to learn more about the strange creature that had become part of their small community. And through it all, Jacob and Roe remained side by side, man and beast, bound by trust, love, and loyalty. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jacob smiled to himself. He had never expected to find family in a creature from another world, but that was the beauty of life. It didn't matter where family came from, only that it was found. "You know," Jacob said softly, patting Roe's head, "I think you're the best thing that ever happened to me." The beast rumbled in agreement, its glowing eyes reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. And as the night settled over the cabin, Jacob knew one thing for certain. Family isn't about blood. It's about the bonds we choose to build, the love we give, and the trust we earn. Together, they had defied the odds. A poor human and an alien beast, proving to the world that compassion and kindness could overcome fear and prejudice. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his coffee cooling in his hands, as Roe settled beside him with a contented sigh. They sat in silence, watching the stars blink to life overhead, a quiet reminder that sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected places. Jacob gazed up at the sky and whispered, "We're right where we're supposed to be, big guy." And with that, the story ended, not with a grand battle or a triumphant victory, but with the quiet, unshakable truth that family is what you make of it.